What if the promise that God will surprise you greatly soon is an invitation to trust in His ability to exceed your expectations? By surrendering your plans to His divine timing, you open the door to blessings that reflect His unmatched love and faithfulness. Faith in waiting is one of the most challenging yet transformative aspects of walking in alignment with God's plan. Waiting often feels like a void, an empty pause where our prayers seem unheard and our efforts appear fruitless. However, faith in waiting invites us to see this period not as stagnation, but as preparation. God's delays are not denials. They are carefully orchestrated pauses meant to align our hearts, refine our character, and prepare us for blessings far greater than we could ever imagine. This concept might seem abstract, but its truth becomes evident when we examine the depth of its purpose. Consider the life of a farmer. After sowing seeds into the ground, the farmer does not expect to see an instant harvest the following day. Instead, he knows that the process of growth is unseen, happening beneath the soil where roots take hold and strength is cultivated. The waiting period, though silent and invisible, is vital. Without it, the seeds would not grow to fruition. Similarly, God's delays are like this unseen growth. They create space for us to develop qualities we may not even realize we lack. Patience, humility, perseverance, and faith are nurtured in the waiting period, ensuring that we are prepared to handle the blessings He has in store for us. Abraham's story serves as a profound example of this principle. God promised him a son, a descendant who would become the father of nations. Yet Abraham had to wait decades before Isaac was born. During this waiting period, Abraham faced moments of doubt and even tried to fulfill the promise on his own terms, resulting in complications that only prolonged his journey. However, despite his missteps, God remained faithful. When the timing was right, not according to Abraham's understanding, but God's divine plan, the promise was fulfilled. Abraham's wait was not a punishment, but a necessary process to deepen his trust and ensure that the blessing would not be squandered. The story of Joseph also exemplifies the beauty of faith in waiting. As a young man, Joseph had dreams of leadership and greatness, yet his life seemed to spiral into hardship. Betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, and later imprisoned for a crime he didn't commit, Joseph spent years in circumstances that seemed to contradict the vision God had given him. Yet these years were not wasted. During this time, Joseph's character was refined. He learned the skills, wisdom, and humility needed to lead. When God's perfect timing came, Joseph was elevated to a position where he could save countless lives during a famine, including the very family that had betrayed him. His waiting was not a delay in the fulfillment of God's promise, but an integral part of the process. In our own lives, the challenge of faith in waiting often feels overwhelming. When we pray for breakthroughs, healing, or resolution, we naturally desire immediate answers. Yet, while we focus on the immediate, God focuses on the eternal. He sees what we cannot, the areas in our hearts and lives that still need preparation. Just as a sculptor carefully chisels away at a block of marble, God uses the waiting period to shape us into vessels capable of receiving and stewarding His blessings. This process might be painful, as it often involves letting go of our timelines and surrendering to His. Imagine a child asking a parent for the keys to a car before learning how to drive. The parent's refusal isn't born out of cruelty, but love. The child may see this as a denial, but the parent knows it is simply a delay until the child is ready to handle the responsibility safely. God's delays function in the same way. They are rooted in His deep love and understanding of what we need, even when we struggle to see it ourselves. Faith in waiting also requires a shift in perspective. Instead of viewing delays as obstacles, we must learn to see them as opportunities. They are opportunities to grow in trust, deepen our relationship with God, and cultivate the spiritual strength needed for what lies ahead. This mindset transforms waiting from a passive experience into an active expression of faith. Waiting becomes an act of worship, a declaration of trust that says, God, I believe you are working, even when I cannot see it. The Bible reminds us repeatedly that those who wait on the Lord will be rewarded. Isaiah 40:31 states, "But those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint." This verse underscores the spiritual renewal that comes from faithful waiting. It is not just about enduring the passage of time, but about embracing the transformative work God is doing within us during the wait. In life, the temptation to take matters into our own hands can be strong. When progress seems slow or non-existent, we might try to force outcomes or shortcuts, often to our detriment. Faith in waiting calls us to resist this urge and instead lean into God's promises. His delays are not rejections, but redirections, guiding us away from paths that might harm us and toward the destiny He has prepared. When we embrace faith in waiting, we position ourselves to receive not just the blessings we desire, but something far greater. God's plans exceed our expectations, and His timing ensures that those plans are delivered at the perfect moment. While waiting is never easy, it is a sacred space where transformation occurs. Trust is deepened, and the foundations for future blessings are laid. Faith in waiting is not about doing nothing. It is about doing the most important thing, trusting God and allowing His work to unfold in His perfect way. Biblical examples are some of the most powerful ways to understand the principle of waiting on God's timing and trusting His perfect plan. Through these stories, we see how individuals in history endured prolonged periods of uncertainty and hardship, yet their faith allowed them to witness the fulfillment of God's promises in extraordinary ways. These examples not only reveal the depth of God's faithfulness, but also demonstrate the transformative power of waiting. Abraham's story is one of the clearest illustrations of waiting on God. God promised Abraham that he would become the father of many nations, a promise that seemed impossible given his and Sarah's advanced age. Decades passed without the promise being fulfilled, and during this time, Abraham faced moments of deep doubt. At one point, he and Sarah attempted to take matters into their own hands, resulting in the birth of Ishmael through Hagar, Sarah's servant. This decision, made out of impatience, led to complications that created tension within Abraham's family and affected future generations. Yet despite these missteps, God remained true to His word. At the appointed time, Sarah gave birth to Isaac, the child of promise, through whom God's covenant would be established. Abraham's journey teaches us that waiting is not wasted time, but a necessary part of God's preparation. Through the waiting, Abraham's faith was refined, and he became a model of trust in God's promises. Joseph's life offers another remarkable example of faith through waiting. As a young man, Joseph had dreams of leadership, visions that foretold his future greatness. However, his life seemed to take a drastically different turn. Sold into slavery by his own brothers, Joseph found himself in Egypt, far from the family and dreams he cherished. As if that weren't enough, he was later falsely accused of a crime and thrown into prison. For years, Joseph lived in conditions that seemed to contradict the destiny he had envisioned. Yet throughout these trials, God was with him. Joseph's time in slavery and prison was not a detour, but part of God's divine plan to shape his character and prepare him for leadership. When the time was right, Joseph was elevated to the second highest position in Egypt, enabling him to save countless lives during a famine, including his own family. His story underscores the importance of trusting God's timing, even when our circumstances seem bleak. It also reminds us that the waiting period is often where God does his greatest work in us. Hannah's story is yet another testament to the power of faithful waiting. Hannah longed for a child, but year after year she remained barren. Her sorrow was compounded by the societal pressure of her time, where a woman's worth was often tied to her ability to bear children. Despite her anguish, Hannah did not lose faith. She poured out her heart to God in prayer, asking him to bless her with a son. Her prayers were so heartfelt that the priest Eli initially thought she was drunk, but upon hearing her, he blessed her and assured her that God had heard her plea. In time, God answered Hannah's prayers, and she gave birth to Samuel. Hannah's faith in waiting was rewarded not only with the child she had longed for, but also with the opportunity to dedicate Samuel to God's service. Samuel grew up to become one of Israel's greatest prophets, playing a pivotal role in the nation's history. Hannah's story shows us that waiting on God is not about passivity, but about active faith and persistent prayer. Her unwavering trust serves as a powerful example of how God's timing brings blessings that exceed our expectations. Beyond these three examples, the Bible is filled with other stories that demonstrate the value of waiting on God. Consider the Israelites at the Red Sea, trapped between Pharaoh's advancing army and an impassable body of water. In that moment, they were forced to wait for God's intervention. At just the right time, God parted the sea, creating a path for his people to cross on dry land. This miraculous act not only saved the Israelites, but also displayed God's power and faithfulness in a way that would be remembered for generations. Similarly, the story of David highlights how waiting refines character. Anointed as king while still a shepherd boy, David did not ascend to the throne immediately. Instead, he spent years fleeing from Saul and enduring trials that tested his faith. During this period, David learned to rely on God and develop the qualities of a righteous leader. When he finally became king, he was not just a ruler, but a man after God's own heart. These stories reveal that waiting is an integral part of God's plan. It is during these times that he shapes us, preparing us for the blessings and responsibilities that lie ahead. Waiting is not a punishment or a delay, but an opportunity for growth and alignment with God's purpose. Each of these biblical figures, Abraham, Joseph, Hannah, and many others, demonstrates that God's promises are always fulfilled in his perfect time. While the waiting may feel long and difficult, it is ultimately worth it, as the blessings that come are far greater than we could ever imagine. In our lives today, these examples remind us that God's timing is always perfect. Just as he worked in the lives of Abraham, Joseph, and Hannah, he is working in our lives even when we cannot see it. The stories of the Bible are not just historical accounts. They are living testimonies of God's faithfulness and love. They encourage us to remain steadfast in our faith, to trust that God's plans are far greater than our own, and to believe that the waiting period is a crucial part of his preparation. The same God who fulfilled his promises to Abraham, Joseph, and Hannah is the same God who watches over us today. Let their stories inspire us to trust him completely, knowing that his timing is never late and his plans are always good. In life, it is often difficult to accept closed doors. They feel like rejection, disappointment, or even failure. When an opportunity we desire is blocked or a dream remains unfulfilled, it can be hard to understand why things have not worked out. However, closed doors are not signs of abandonment or failure, but are often divine redirections. God uses these moments to lead us away from what is not meant for us and toward the opportunities that align with His greater purpose for our lives. Trusting this process requires faith, patience, and a shift in perspective. Consider the story of the Apostle Paul in the book of Acts. Paul had a clear mission: to spread the gospel to as many people as possible. At one point, he planned to preach in Asia, but the Holy Spirit prevented him from going. From Paul's perspective, this closed door must have been confusing and frustrating. Why would God block a good and noble mission? What Paul could not see at that moment was that God was redirecting him to Europe, where his ministry would have a far-reaching impact. It was in Europe that Paul established churches, wrote letters that would later become part of the New Testament, and spread the gospel in ways that changed the course of history. The closed door in Asia was not a rejection, but a redirection toward a greater purpose. This example reminds us that what may seem like a setback is often God setting us up for something much greater. In our own lives, closed doors can appear in various forms. It might be a job we desperately wanted but did not get, a relationship that ended despite our best efforts, or a project we worked hard on that ultimately failed. In these moments, it is easy to feel defeated or to question whether God is truly listening to our prayers. But when we trust in God's wisdom, we begin to see these closed doors as acts of love and protection. God sees the bigger picture. He knows the dangers, distractions, or limitations that lie beyond those doors, and He redirects us toward paths that are better suited for us, even if we do not understand it at the time. The story of Joseph provides a powerful example of this principle. As a young man, Joseph had dreams of leadership and greatness. Yet, instead of stepping into his dreams immediately, he faced one closed door after another. He was thrown into a pit by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused of a crime, and imprisoned. Each of these events could have seemed like the end of the road for Joseph's dreams. However, these closed doors were part of God's preparation process. Each setback refined Joseph's character, teaching him humility, perseverance, and faith. When the time was right, God opened a door that no one could shut. Joseph was elevated to the second highest position in Egypt, where he was able to save countless lives during a famine. The very path of closed doors that seemed to delay Joseph's dreams was, in fact, the path that led him to his destiny. Faithful waiting during these times of closed doors is not passive. It is an active process of trusting God, leaning on His promises, and remaining obedient to His guidance. Waiting refines our character, teaching us patience, resilience, and faith. It helps us develop the spiritual maturity needed to handle the blessings and responsibilities that lie ahead. Just as gold is refined through fire, our faith is strengthened through the trials of waiting and enduring closed doors. These moments force us to rely on God rather than our own understanding, drawing us closer to Him in the process. Hannah's story beautifully illustrates the refining nature of waiting. For years, Hannah prayed for a child, enduring societal pressure and personal anguish. Yet she remained faithful, pouring out her heart to God in prayer. Her waiting was not wasted. During this time, God was preparing her for a blessing that would not only fulfill her deepest desire, but also impact generations to come. When God finally opened the door and blessed her with Samuel, Hannah's character and faith had been strengthened to the point where she willingly dedicated her son to God's service. Samuel went on to become one of Israel's greatest prophets, playing a pivotal role in the nation's history. Had Hannah given up or grown bitter during her waiting period, She might have missed out on God's perfect timing and greater purpose. Closed doors also teach us to let go of control. As humans, we often try to force things to happen according to our plans and timelines. We knock on doors that God has closed, trying to push them open through our own strength. However, forcing a door open can lead to disappointment or even disaster. When we surrender control and trust that God's plans are better than ours, we position ourselves to receive His best. This surrender is not easy, but it is essential for living a life aligned with His purpose. One of the most important lessons to learn is that God's timing is perfect. A door that is closed today may be open tomorrow, but it will only open when we are ready to walk through it. Sometimes the waiting period is not about the door at all, but about us. God uses this time to prepare us, shaping our character, building our faith, and teaching us lessons we need to learn before stepping into the next season of life. In this way, closed doors are not just redirections. They are opportunities for growth and transformation. The story of David further emphasizes this truth. Anointed as king while still a young shepherd, David did not ascend to the throne immediately. Instead, he spent years fleeing from Saul, enduring trials, and learning to rely on God. During this time, David's character was being shaped. He learned to lead, to trust, and to seek God's guidance in all things. When the time came for him to become king, David was not just a ruler, but a man after God's own heart. The waiting period and the closed doors he experienced were essential in preparing him for the responsibilities and blessings of kingship. Trusting God in the face of closed doors requires faith, but it also brings peace. When we believe that God is in control and that His plans are for our good, we can rest in the knowledge that every closed door has a purpose. Instead of striving and struggling to make things happen on our own, we can focus on seeking God's guidance and remaining faithful to Him. This shift in perspective transforms closed doors from sources of frustration into opportunities for divine alignment. Every closed door is a reminder that God is the author of our story. He knows the beginning, the middle, and the end. While we may not understand His ways, we can trust that He is working all things together for our good. Closed doors are not the end of the journey. They are stepping stones to greater opportunities and blessings. By trusting in His timing and surrendering to His plan, we position ourselves to receive blessings that exceed anything we could have imagined. Faithful waiting and trust in God's purpose turn moments of disappointment into seasons of preparation, ensuring that when the right door opens, we are ready to step through it. The nature of God's surprises is one of the most remarkable aspects of His relationship with humanity. His blessings often arrive in ways that defy our expectations, far surpassing what we could have imagined or even dared to hope for. These surprises reveal His power, love, and perfect timing, reminding us that God's ways are higher than our ways. While we may plan or predict how certain situations should unfold, God's interventions demonstrate that He operates beyond human limitations, orchestrating outcomes that leave us in awe. One of the clearest examples of God's surprises is found in the story of Peter and the miraculous catch of fish. Peter, an experienced fisherman, had spent an entire night laboring without catching a single fish. Exhausted and disheartened, he was ready to give up. Then Jesus instructed him to cast his net once more into the deep water. From a logical perspective, Peter could have refused, as it made no sense to try again after such a long, unproductive effort. Yet he chose to obey, saying, "Because you say so, I will let down the nets." What followed was nothing short of miraculous. Peter's nets were filled to the point of breaking, overflowing with fish in a way he had never experienced before. This moment not only provided for Peter's immediate needs, but also revealed the abundance of God's provision. It was more than a physical blessing. It was a spiritual revelation of God's power and the transformative potential of obedience and faith. Another powerful example is the parting of the Red Sea. The Israelites, having just escaped slavery in Egypt, found themselves trapped between Pharaoh's advancing army and the seemingly insurmountable Red Sea. From a human perspective, their situation was hopeless. They were out of options and faced certain destruction. Yet, in this moment of desperation, God performed one of the most dramatic miracles recorded in the Bible. He parted the sea, creating a path for the Israelites to cross on dry ground. What appeared to be an impossible situation was transformed into a miraculous demonstration of God's power and faithfulness. This surprise not only saved the Israelites, but also solidified their faith in God's ability to deliver them from any challenge. It reminds us that when all seems lost, God can intervene in ways that are beyond human comprehension. God's surprises are not limited to grand dramatic events. They also manifest in deeply personal and intimate ways. Consider the story of Sarah and Abraham. Well past the age of childbearing, Sarah had long given up hope of having a child. When God promised Abraham that Sarah would bear a son, her initial reaction was one of disbelief. She even laughed at the idea. Yet, at the appointed time, Sarah gave birth to Isaac, the child through whom God's covenant would be fulfilled. This blessing was not only a fulfillment of God's promise, but also a reminder that He can bring life and joy into situations that seem dead or impossible. Sarah's laughter, once born of doubt, was transformed into a laughter of joy and wonder at the fulfillment of God's word. In addition to the personal blessings individuals receive, God's surprises often have a ripple effect, impacting the lives of many others. Joseph's story is a striking example of this. After being sold into slavery and spending years in prison, Joseph's life seemed to be stuck in a cycle of misfortune. Yet at the right moment, God elevated him to the position of second in command in Egypt. This sudden promotion not only changed Joseph's life, but also positioned him to save countless lives during a severe famine. What began as personal suffering for Joseph ultimately became a blessing for an entire nation. This reveals that God's surprises are not just about meeting our immediate needs. They are about fulfilling His greater purposes, often in ways that we cannot foresee. God's surprises also teach us to trust in His timing. The story of Lazarus illustrates this beautifully. When Lazarus fell gravely ill, his sisters, Mary and Martha, sent word to Jesus, hoping He would come and heal their brother. To their dismay, Jesus delayed His arrival, and Lazarus died. By the time Jesus reached their home, Lazarus had been in the tomb for 4 days. To Mary and Martha, it seemed as though Jesus had arrived too late. But what they perceived as a delay was actually a setup for one of Jesus' most powerful miracles. Standing before the tomb, Jesus called Lazarus out, and he emerged alive. This act not only restored their brother, but also revealed Jesus' authority over life and death. The timing of this miracle demonstrated that God's surprises often come when we least expect them, in ways that leave no doubt about His power and glory. These stories highlight a central truth. God's surprises are always abundant, timely, and impactful. They remind us that His plans for us exceed anything we could plan for ourselves. While we often focus on immediate needs or desires, God sees the bigger picture. He is not only concerned with solving our problems, but also with shaping our character, growing our faith, and drawing us closer to Him. His blessings are designed not only to meet our expectations, but to surpass them in ways that reveal His love and faithfulness. In our own lives, we may experience God's surprises in countless ways. It could be an unexpected job opportunity that perfectly aligns with our passions and skills, a relationship that enters our life at just the right moment, or a resolution to a problem we thought had no solution. These moments remind us that God is always working behind the scenes, orchestrating events in ways we cannot see. They also challenge us to remain open to His plans, even when they differ from our own. One of the most profound aspects of God's surprises is the joy and awe they bring. When He moves, it becomes clear that His blessings are not confined to human limitations. He does not simply meet our needs, He exceeds them, providing in ways that touch every aspect of our lives. This abundance is a reflection of His nature. As Ephesians 3:20 reminds us, God is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think. This verse captures the essence of His surprises. They are always greater, richer, and more transformative than we could ever imagine. The challenge for us is to remain faithful and expectant, even when we cannot see what God is doing. His surprises often come after long periods of waiting or in situations that seem hopeless. Yet, it is in these moments of uncertainty that His power is most clearly revealed. Trusting in His ability to surprise us requires surrendering our timelines, expectations, and doubts, allowing Him to work in His perfect way. God's surprises remind us of His sovereignty and His deep love for us. They teach us to trust Him more fully, to embrace the unexpected, and to live with a sense of wonder at His ability to transform any situation. Whether His blessings come as quiet moments of peace or dramatic demonstrations of His power, they always reflect His goodness and His desire to bless us abundantly. His surprises are not just answers to our prayers, they are invitations to experience His love, power, and faithfulness in ways that leave us forever changed. God's perfect timing is not just a concept, it is the essence of His divine plan, woven intricately into the fabric of our lives. It teaches us that every blessing, every breakthrough, and every transformation happens precisely when we are ready to receive it and when it will have the greatest impact. In a world that constantly demands instant results and quick solutions, waiting for God's timing can feel like an act of surrender. But it is in this surrender that we discover the depth of His love and the magnitude of His purpose for us. Trusting in His timing requires faith to believe that He knows best, patience to endure the seasons of waiting, and a willingness to let go of our own plans in favor of His greater design. Throughout life, it is easy to grow weary during periods of waiting. Yet God's timing is not passive. It is deeply active and intentional. While we may not see immediate changes, God is always working behind the scenes, orchestrating circumstances, aligning people, and preparing our hearts for the blessings He has in store. His timing is not only perfect, but also purposeful. When we wait faithfully, we position ourselves to receive blessings that go beyond our understanding. It is through waiting that we learn patience, perseverance, and humility, qualities that not only prepare us for His gifts, but also transform us into people who reflect His character. Consider how God's timing is often revealed through the unexpected. Abraham and Sarah waited decades for the fulfillment of God's promise, and when the time came, their joy surpassed their long years of doubt. Joseph endured trials and betrayals before being elevated to a position of leadership at precisely the right moment to save nations from famine. These stories remind us that God's timing not only blesses us personally, but also fulfills a larger purpose, touching lives beyond our own. His timing is not confined to our desires. It aligns with His eternal plan, ensuring that every blessing is multiplied and every purpose is fulfilled. Trusting in God's timing brings a sense of peace that transcends understanding. When we stop striving to control outcomes and instead surrender to His plan, we free ourselves from the anxiety of trying to force things to happen. In that surrender, we find rest, knowing that His plans are good and His timing is always perfect. The blessings that come through His timing are not rushed or incomplete. They are abundant, transformative, and aligned with His will. They leave us in awe not just of what He has done, but also of who He is, a God who sees us, loves us, and desires the very best for us. As we reflect on God's perfect timing, we are reminded that waiting is not wasted time. It is a season of preparation, a period where faith is tested and strengthened. While it may feel like a delay, it is actually a divine process of alignment. When the time is right, His blessings often come suddenly and powerfully, transforming our lives in ways we could never have imagined. This is the beauty of His timing. It leads us to a place where we can see His hand in every detail, where every delay makes sense in hindsight, and where every blessing feels perfectly timed. In the end, God's timing is a reminder of His sovereignty and His unfailing love for us. It calls us to trust Him fully, to surrender our desires and timelines, and to rest in the assurance that His plans are always for our good. When we align our hearts with His, we find not only fulfillment, but also peace and joy that surpass human understanding. His timing teaches us to live in faith, knowing that every promise He has made will be fulfilled at the perfect moment. Trust in His timing, for it brings blessings that transform lives, fulfill divine purposes, and reveal the greatness of His plan.